Welcome to Bogues. This is the official basketball podcast. So hopefully you enjoy. Let's get started real quick. We have some papers ruffling in the background. Got my notes. Come prepared as best I can. We're going to start with the Clippers. There was a very interesting Clippers story I read the other day. Johan Buha, hope I pronounced that right, from The Athletic. First of all, The Athletic is a very good source for sporting news in general, but basketball news. It's a subscriber-only platform. They don't do the clickbait bullshit. They do in-depth stuff, old school journalism. They dig, they take their time, and it's usually a long-form article that you can really enjoy reading. It's not what I'm used to reading for sure with the free stuff, so it's well worth paying for. I'm not sure how much it is, and they're not a sponsor, and I'm not spruiking them for that reason. I'm spruiking them because they write great articles, much like this one. They wrote about the Clippers and the turmoil they faced last season. There was some rumblings. I just saw Doc Rivers mention that he felt like the players that were already on the roster didn't accept the new players, which was, new superstars on the team in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. This article was the contrary. It was pretty scathing in regards to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard not buying in and getting the superstar treatment. So I'd assume it's in the middle somewhere. And yeah, I mean, arguably one of the most talented rosters in the NBA, really in control of the Denver series, up 3-1. I know that feeling of being up 3-1 and lost the series in crazy fashion. We're up huge in multiple games. But from an outsider, I do know a little bit more than most that you hear from guys that played against them and friends of guys there and whatnot. But the Clippers, when I was still playing with the Warriors in 18-19, they lost a lot of their players, Blake and Chris Paul and whatnot, and they were picked I don't know where they were picked. They were picked at the bottom of the Western Conference somewhere. And they overachieved. They were a bunch of underdogs, and they had some fight in them. I really thought, even when we played them in the first round, they were tough. We had them down 31 game. They came back and won, and they never gave up no matter what the score was. And they just had some guys that had a lot of fight. They had a bunch of different lineups that Doc would go to. He had a small ball lineup. He had a big lineup. He had his Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell lineup with shooters spaced around him. So they did a fantastic job, and they were fighters. So you go to an off season and you sign arguably the two biggest free agents that year in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Kawhi coming off a championship with Toronto and leading them to their first trophy ever, and you think they're the favorites, right? And not to be. Huge culture issues down there apparently. The regular Joe NBA players weren't happy with the superstar treatment that those two were receiving or that they imposed. And I'm going to be honest with you, superstars receive superstar treatment. It's just the reality of the NBA. Is it right? Is it wrong? Arguable. What scope are you looking at it from? But I can tell you, when those guys met with the Clippers, both of them, this is what I think happened. They had a list of demands that they wanted, whether that's I need, 3 massages a day, or whether I need my own space in the locker room, whatever it is. They would have had demands, and the Clippers would have had to agree. And that was one of the reports. One of the reports was that Kawhi, I think, wanted his own locker room or his own space, which is interesting in itself. I've heard of a few players doing that, but not many. A few other tidbits that those guys would change practice schedules last minute. They'd tell Doc when they wanted to practice. And look, I think that's a bit far for a superstar, no matter how good you are, to dictate. I think you still, look, let's be honest, superstars, they need more hugs than the regular players. Use that metaphor, but there becomes a line where it can muddy the waters with the regular Joes that are setting screens for you and rebounding, doing the dirty work. So you got to be very, very careful there. And I think that's exactly what happened with that team. I think it was an us versus them mentality in the locker room. That happens in a lot of locker rooms, believe it or not. And for a team that was facing as much pressure as the Clippers, it all just faltered for them and they couldn't get over the line. You factor that in with the way the NBA has gone with load management, which I think is important. I think you got to rest guys at certain times. I think you got to play it smart with the guys that are in your starting lineup at times and factor in strategically some rest. Hey, this road trip, we're going to rest one of the guys. I'm all for that. The Clippers, I think, did it probably more than they probably should have. Problem being, these guys haven't played together. And that was the kicker. If this was their second or third year, I think you can load manage the shit out of them. But because they hadn't played together, the Clippers' style completely changed from the season before to this season. They were still figuring out lineups, who can play well together. And because from what I heard, a lot of the time they didn't have a full squad at practice. The stars wouldn't practice a lot, and put miles in their legs in the practice gym. So you're not getting those reps. You're not getting that familiarity with this guy likes the ball here. This guy, this is his spot. Even if you're a role player, like if it's a Zubats or a Montrezl Harrell, you know where, let's say, Kawhi is generally going to shoot that pull-up jumper. You can get yourself ready for rebounding position. Like all that stuff takes reps and time and games. And it's not something that you can just walk through and talent can just impose its will and get you wins. And they were a very talented team and they won a lot of games, but they just they definitely underachieved. So that article I highly recommend a read. It for me, it emphasizes how important culture is, how important familiarity is, and I believe that this was their downfall. I think that, look, at the end of the day, you need talent. You need superstars. You don't have superstars, you're not going to get very far in the NBA. And it's a superstar-driven league. They run the teams. They run the coach. They run the GM. Don't get fooled. There's maybe a small number of teams that don't do it that way, but for the most part, you want to get a superstar player, you're bowing to their demands. So that's a separate issue. But I think culture needs to be prevalent a little bit more than it is in the NBA. And I think the culture that we had in Golden State for our first run, it was self-formed by good people, good players, and just a genuine team of guys who had been all over the league. We had a bunch of different veterans. We had guys that have been on losing teams, guys that have been on winning teams, guys that have won in college, and it all just blended nicely. And we liked being around each other for the most part. Look, you're going to have the 12th guy on the roster doesn't like the 5th player on the roster. Like, it's human nature. Not everyone's going to love each other, but we understood for us to all be rewarded with contracts down the track, for other teams to come and then offer you deals or whatever it may be for success. If we win, everyone's going to reap that reward, and that's what some guys just don't understand. And we understood that in Golden State, and it was phenomenal. I can guarantee you that Clippers team did not have I don't even think one team meal together that was not pushed by either the front office, the coaches, management, or some sort of mandatory meal that they had to have. It was, by that I mean, the players never self-organized a team meal together to break bread. And if they did, I doubt it's more than 1 or 2 times. And the good teams do that. The good teams will get together away from when they don't have to be together, especially on the road. Like, what are you doing on the road? Well, we know what some guys do for the most part, but that only takes an hour or 2. But you can still have it. You can still have a team meal. You can still go and eat with your guys and then go take care of business later on. Have your fun. But that's where the Warriors team, every road trip we went on, we had at least 10 guys out of a roster of 15 that would go to a team dinner. We'd book a local steakhouse, 7 o'clock in the lobby, whoever wants to come. And at first we started doing it, it was 3 or 4 guys. It was generally myself, Harrison, and a few stragglers that would come along. And then all of a sudden we got to 7 players, and then 10 and then every road trip, it was like guys were asking where we going to eat. And some cities you get to, let's say I'm from that city. Hypothetically, I'm from Indiana, and we get to Indiana, I'm like, look, our cousins and aunties and uncles, and I need to go see them. Guys would be like, hey, yeah, you don't, go do your thing, and us 10 guys will go. So you wouldn't always get a full roster because guys are from certain cities and guys might have family or friends in town, which is understandable. But for an NBA team to even get 10 players, to get 5 players to a non-mandatory team meal, doesn't happen, I'm telling you right now. And that was the beauty of that Golden State team. We built so much camaraderie and culture was built away from the basketball court. If you can do that, you've won half the battle. And if you're a coach on those teams and you don't have to, tell guys to get together, you've won half the battle. And that's what it is these days. A lot of it's, the X's and O's is important, but it's people management, culture, guys liking each other. If you can get that right, you can almost not draw up any plays and still have some sort of success because guys like playing with each other. So you see the Clippers situation, who felt the brunt of a bad season, the coach, and that's the unfortunate reality of pro sports in the NBA. Doc Rivers gets fired, moves on. If they don't have a successful year next year, it'll be the GM calling it now. That's just the way it goes. And it usually goes coach, GM, maybe coach again, and then the owner might start to figure out, maybe it's my players, maybe not the superstar players I have, maybe it's them. I'm not saying this with the Clippers situation. They get a pass, it's their first year together, but that's generally the way it goes, and it's the unfortunate reality of it. So the Doc's over in Philly. The Clippers have now brought in Ty Lue, who I think is a pretty good hire. I think he will bring that player-coach mentality. I think he understands. Played with Kobe, played with Shaq. He's coached LeBron. I think he understands which guys need more hugs than others, and I think he'll do pretty well in LA. And I also think that, Paul George just signed a long extension. Kawhi's going to be hearing all this stuff as much as they probably say he doesn't read the media and listen to the media. I think they all know what's at stake. So I think you'd hope someone in that Clippers locker room gets those guys together for a few team meals away from coaches and start building that bottom camaraderie, and we'll say, let's leave the bullshit at the door. Let's move forward. And I think they'll bounce back and have a chance to be one of the favorites come out of the West. So read that article. Once again, it's at The Athletic. It's a really good long-form read, the way journalism should be. You'll enjoy it. Some other news that we saw a trade, a pretty big trade, Westbrook for John Wall, Houston, Washington trade. Interesting one to me. I think it's a much of a muchness trade. I think John Wall's, a little bit younger. Could be wrong. They might be around the same age, but similar players to an extent. But what I mean by that is I think Russ is a little bit more athletic coming at your chest, whereas John uses his athleticism to slice and dice, but they all attack the rim and get in the paint. They put a lot of pressure on the rim from that guard position. They both are streaky with their jumper. Obviously, Westbrook's had a down year shooting the ball. People knock them for not shooting the ball as well as other guys. That they do so much out there that I get frustrated when people just harp on the negativity of their games when they do so many things out there that are elite. And like I said, I think it's a much of a muchness trade. I think Russ is obviously a better rebounder, really fills up stat sheet. John Wall can also fill it up a little bit, but I think it's I don't know who's won that trade. I think Russ added another chip on his shoulder with how angry he plays on most nights. Is going to be interesting in Washington. So that'll be an interesting one. And then you look at John Wall getting to Houston. The elephant in the room there is James Harden. That was a great team that we played when I was with Golden State, and they were set up to beat the Golden State Warriors. They came close before I was there, with KD's first and second year there, which I think was 16, 17, 17, 18, I believe. I think that was right. And I came in 18, 19, and we played them, and we ended up beating them when they had Chris Paul and James and all that. They were tough, though. They were a team that every possession was massive against them. They did not beat themselves. You had to beat them, and we beat them. A bit shorthanded, but we beat them. And it was one of the most thrilling playoff series wins I've been a part of, just because KD got hurt and everything we were going through. We ended up putting it all together and beating them. But you look at now what's going on. James Harden reportedly didn't report the training camp on time. I believe was asking for a trade, didn't get traded. Has now reported, I think. And look, I don't see this situation ending with James Harden on the roster. I think he ends up getting moved. I think the writing's on the wall. When these things start rearing their ugly head about trades and whatnot, I think you're just delaying the inevitable. I mean, cut the head off the snake and get on with it. I think they're going to end up moving him. I think he wants to form a big three somewhere. Philly is rumored, and Brooklyn's the other one. That would be an interesting one in Brooklyn, because that would then give you three guys who generally have the ball in their hands for the majority of the game, and you have three of those guys on one team. I'm not sure how that would work, because each possessing two of those guys would essentially have to be a role player or playing off the ball. So don't know how that's going to work if it happens, but let's see where that goes. But I think my prediction is that Houston will not have James Harden on their roster by the end of the season. I hope he stays, because I think that he's been sensational there, and I think they've been a pretty tough team. They've been so close to making the NBA Finals. Who knows how that goes? An interesting tidbit to that with the trade stuff was when I was in Milwaukee, lockout year, I believe, was 2011, 2012. So in the off season, we traded for Steven Jackson. S-Jax, my guy. I had played with him obviously that season, and I love the guy on the court. He's balls to the wall. Like it doesn't matter what's going on off the court. If he's happy with where he's playing or the coach, or when he's on the court with you, he's ready to go. He's ready to throw a punch. He's ready to fight for you. And you knew that. He's one of the few guys in the NBA that I knew, like, playing against him or with him, he's got your back if you're with him. And if you're not on his team, bad luck, you may be copping a stray one. So we had him in Milwaukee, and it was a kind of a junky year with the lockout. So it started late, and we're playing okay at the time. I think we were 500 at the time. And then I guess S-Jax came in that off season when we traded for him. He came in on the first day of camp, comes in, does his media. They welcome him to Milwaukee, and I still remember he goes, "Welcome to Milwaukee. Thanks for having me. I just want to say I want my extension." And I think he was 34 at the time. So our GM, John Hammond, nervous fella at the best of times, doesn't know what to do. He's like, oh, is he going to cause us problems? And S-Jax didn't really cause us problems off the court. I mean, he wanted his extension, but was on the court, was training hard, was a baller, man. Like, he was, like I said, when he gets on the court, forget any distractions that are going on, he's going to give you everything he's got. So it comes a point where he's trying to get traded, and he's like, look, if you're not going to give me my extension, get me out of here. This isn't a team that's got a chance for the finals. I want to go to a contender. And I guess they're moving slowly on it. I think it got to January. Season started in December, got to January, still hadn't moved him, and he's waiting, what's going on. So I break my ankle in early January in Houston, fly back to Milwaukee with the team, get my scans out for the year, broke my talus, which caused me a hell of a lot of problems the next couple of years, but story for another day. And I still remember going to the Bradley Center to lift some weights. It's game day, shoot-arounds in the morning. Go in, and the team's out on the court doing shoot around. Steven Jackson's in the weight room with me. I doubt he'd mind me telling this story. He's riding the bike with me while I'm doing my lift, right? I'm with the strength trainer. I'm lifting weights. And so John Hammond comes in the weight room, and he's like, "Yes, Jax, what are you doing, man?" And he's like, "Look, I've got back spasms until you trade me." And I was kind of lifting, I almost dropped the weight on my forehead, like doing bench press or something. I'm like kind of eavesdropping into it. And John Hammond's, he kind of had a bit of a nervous stutter. He's like stuttering all around the room, like, "Come on, Steven, no, don't do that, like getting really nervous and stuff." And basically, Jack said it again. He goes, "Look, I want to get out of here. I've told you guys, I'm giving you a chance. You're taking your time. I am injured until you trade me." And so Steven Jackson basically just sat out, and I was out for the year, and he would actually go and get workouts in before games. So on game night, he would go out at 7 p.m. game. He'd go out at 4:30, 5 o'clock and get a full sweat on with an assistant coach, and then just go and put a suit on and sit at the bench. And do you fault him for it? Was it handled the right way? Arguable. He was frustrated that the Bucks were kind of dragging their feet on getting him out of there, and he knew that deadlines were approaching to get on another team, and he wanted to familiarize himself with wherever he was going. So just a really interesting story, and he ends up getting traded in a deal with me to the Golden State Warriors. The Warriors had a bad record at the time, and Milwaukee was starting to feel the pressure about making the playoffs. So they went for a home run, and they had already injured me, and then a guy in Steven Jackson that wasn't playing sent us away from Monte Ellis, who then came in healthy to Milwaukee, and they made a playoff run and made the 8th seed. So then Steven Jackson ends up getting released by the Warriors because I think on the first phone call, Mark Jackson told me that he said, "Welcome to Golden State," and Steven Jackson said, "Thanks, I want my extension." It was a young team that was rebuilding, didn't have a chance of making the playoffs that year, and they said, "Yeah, we'll waive you," and they waived him, and then he ended up with the San Antonio Spurs. I think he finished the season with them, and they went to the playoffs. I'm not sure how that all ended, but I know he was with the Spurs. But definitely not a knock. This isn't a knock on S-Jax. It's just one of the stories of many that I've picked up along the way, and a lot of this kind of stuff when trades are involved and free agency signings and movement. It's a chess game, and it's all orchestrated between your agent, the GM, the coach. It's done weeks before. Sometimes it's done. It's a leverage game. It's this, it's that. And there's unique ways you need to fend for yourself sometimes. And Steven Jackson found a really good way to get himself out of there, and it worked. He got out of there, and he drew a line in the sand and said, "If you guys aren't going to move me quickly, I'm not playing until you do." And he got out of there, and then I believe as soon as he got to San Antonio, he was fully healthy. The back had got much better, and he was playing. So, which leads me on to, it's really interesting when you're in the league and you figure out with trades and free agency signings how that all works. Let me break it down for you. So, most agents and journalists, but most agents have journalists in their pocket. So, what I mean by that, the journalists that break big free agency news before anyone has a whiff of it, the journalists that break big trade news before anyone has any clue what's even going on, they're getting that information from agents. Now, this isn't I'm just giving them the scoop because they're good guys. There's returns on that favor that come down the line, but those journalists will get all the scoops, and generally the big agencies have one or two guys they feed to. Generally it's one, but that agency will then in the off season, they've just fed this journalist, "Hey, this trade's going down. He's broken it." He gets all the clout and clicks. This, journalist's broken it. Good for him. Unbelievable. The off season's going to come. That agency is going to call that journalist and say, "Hey, we have Andrew Bogut. He's going to free agency. He's out of contract. His home club where he wants to stay, let's say the Milwaukee Bucks or Golden State Warriors, they haven't offered him the max deal yet. We think he's worth the max. But look, we need you to write an article to say there's 3 rival teams that have offered him the max, and he's thinking about it, but he really wants to stay where he's at, but he hasn't had an official offer from his home team. So they'll put pressure on teams through a journalist. Home crowd will get pissed off if they want to keep that player. That's how it works. Sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't, but that's how these relationships are created. And you scratch my back, I scratch yours. You wonder how these journalists have, there was a draft where I think Woj announced draft picks before Adam Silver or whoever was doing the second round announced them live on camera. He already tweeted them. It's just like, and that's from agents. Agents are leaking it to him, and there'll be a return favor down the track. So if you haven't figured that out for yourself, it's something you will now know. Generally, I can tell you because I've been in the business, but if you study it long enough, you can figure out which agencies are involved with which journalists. Basically, journalists that break a bunch of players' signings, check where those players are, who they're represented by, and then do the math. It's pretty easy to figure out once you actually know what's going on. But it's a brutal business. It's a shifty business. There's so much shit that goes on behind the scenes that you'd have no idea about. And there's teams that have signed friends of superstars before that superstar becomes a free agent. There's been teams that have signed players who are in the same agency as a certain player who's coming into free agency because it gives them a better chance of then getting him that following year. That player might have said, hey, sign a few of my boys, look after them, pay them for a couple of seasons while you guys suck, and I'm the big fish in 2 years that'll sign there. And it's happened. I know for a fact it's happened, and it will continue to happen. It's just the nasty side of the business. But now that you know that, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Moving on, Kyrie Irving has announced that he's not talking to the media this whole season. I'll take the under. I'm willing to bet that he will eventually. I think this is a lose-lose situation for him. I respect Kyrie for the fact that he voices his own opinion that's not PR approved. Controversial at times, yes. Sometimes he's arguably said things that people deem as crazy and silly. I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing the fact that I respect him because he says what he thinks and feels. And that's a rarity in NBA basketball. It's a rarity in Hollywood. It's a rarity with sports stars and celebrities. It does not happen unless it's PR approved. But he's taken an L on this one. It's a lose-lose situation. The NBA has just fined him a couple of days ago or today. I think it was $20,000 to $30,000. That's going to continue to happen if he doesn't talk. Going to keep finding the nets, and they're going to have to come to some sort of solution, which I think will happen in the next couple of weeks, if not month. I doubt if he goes through the whole season without talking to the media, it would be absolutely amazing. I will absolutely piss myself laughing, but I don't think it'll happen. I understand somewhat what his frustrations could be. Look, that's the main reason why I'm doing a podcast. There's journalists out there and media out there that preconceive a notion about you, that have a certain story and how they're going to write it in their mind, and they come and ask you questions, and they've already said about how they're going to write it and what they're going to talk about and how they're going to paint you as either a player or a person. And no matter what you say is not going to change that. So then on top of that, you got clickbaiters, you got people posting shit for Instagram likes and social media likes, and the NBA locker room is very welcoming to the media, as it should be, and that's a conversation which leads to, that's why the NBA is what it is. It's welcome to all kinds of media, but at times there's some bloggers that are borderline stalkerish at times, or there was, I don't know if there still is. There's sometimes people in there that are just in there as fans. I can tell you there was some journalists, quote unquote, from China many a times that came in, didn't speak a word of English, had no translators, didn't interview anyone in the locker room, said they were bloggers from somewhere in China. I can guarantee you they were a friend of a friend that got a hold of someone at the NBA and got in. And these dudes are trying to sneak in selfies with Steph Curry or Klay Thompson, and you just, that's what you have to deal with. But the real journalists there really get pissed off at those guys because it makes them all look like idiots. But for the most part, it's good people in there that are trying to do the right thing, but one person out of that group will ruin it. And I think that's Kyrie's issue, is he doesn't want what he says being misquoted or clickbaited or written a certain way that's taken out of context. And that's just going to happen when you talk to media. You're going to be taken out of context. They're going to paint things how you didn't want them to, and it's happened to me numerous times, sometimes rightfully, sometimes wrongfully. And I assume that's his gripe. So he just said, I'm not talking to you, but it's not going to work. The NBA is very protective of their media relationship, as they should be. The media have helped the NBA get to a point where guys can get paid $30 and $40 million. And I totally get it from both sides in this argument. But like I said, I think Kyrie will take the L on that, and they'll eventually have him talking to the media. You can best believe that. Moving on, I'll give you some quick predictions. I don't get too much into these. I don't overthink them. I think the Western Conference Finals, this will be a no-shit moment. Clips-Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. I think the Clips bounce back. I think they're facing a lot more pressure, but I think they'll be a bit more serious with everything going on there. The Lakers, to me, had the best offseason that I've seen from a championship team in a long, long time. They retooled brilliantly. They stole Montrezl Harrell from the Clips. They've really got some great pieces that'll complement LeBron and what they've gone there, and I think they'll be there when it's all said and done. Eastern Conference Finals, I have Milwaukee, potentially Giannis's last run in Milwaukee. It'd be a shame if he left, but we know what the league's like. I don't see Giannis as a huge big city superstar guy, but I've been shocked before, so I hope he stays in Milwaukee. I think he's very suited to that city with the way he plays. But I think Milwaukee will be playing Philly. I think Doc Rivers will bring new life into that squad. I think he'll get them to play their best brand of basketball. All these picks, mind you, are fully healthy and no trade, so don't hold me to it. But I think they'll be a top four. Milwaukee, Philly, Eastern Conference Finals. LA, Western Conference Finals would be great. I mean, the TV ratings would be out of control for that one. So I like that. I'm going to give you a tip from left field. The two teams that did not make the playoffs in their respective conferences that I think will next season. Western Conference, I'm going with my guys, Golden State Warriors. I think I have them penciled as 7-11, somewhere around that ballpark. The West is tough. This is I could be completely wrong on this one, but I think with the Steph Curry fully healed up and healthy, if they're healthy as a team and their whole roster plays 70-plus games, I see them make the playoffs. I think Steph any given night can go for 40, 50. You win games on that alone. So I think if they're scraping the high 40s, low 50s, they'll be in there somewhere. Hard to do, but like I said, they need to be healthy. Everything needs to go right. They're getting a better mix of youth and veteran leadership, and I think they've got an opportunity to be much better. Out east, I've got the Washington Wizards. Obviously an injury-riddled last season with John Wall out of the lineup for most of the season. Bradley Beal, love his game, plays both ends. I think he led them pretty well last season with what they were dealing with. Add Russell Westbrook's fire and passion to that team. I see them in there. I don't know exactly where, but I see them making the playoffs. So they're two tips for you. And real quickly, we're going to finish NBA-wise with my Australian brethren. I'm going to give you a breakout Aussie for next season. I think will be Bangers, Aaron Baines. I believe he'll have a breakout year. I think he had a very good bubble. DeAndre Ayton in and out of the lineup. When he was out, Bainesy was killing it, shooting three ball at a massive clip. And DeAndre came back and he was in and out of the lineup, not playing as much minutes. He actually got close to some DMPs a few games, which was head scratching. But I think Toronto is a perfect system for him. They space the floor phenomenally. Nick Nurse is a fantastic coach. Really knows his stuff. He'll put Bainesy, at times on the block, wrestling, get no boards, and then he'll have him pick and popping a lot too. So I think that's a huge pickup for Toronto, and I think Bainesy will be the one Aussie that has the best breakout year coming from their previous season. I think obviously Ben will still be the best Aussie in the league numbers-wise, but watch out for Aaron Baines putting together a fantastic season there in Toronto, and lucky him, he doesn't have to live in the ice cold with the bubble. I believe they're based down in Florida right now with the coronavirus restrictions going on, and the whole shit show they got on there with their number and cases. So that'll be interesting. One other thing I'd look out for is I think Patty Mills could be on the move. I think there's some rumblings that there were this offseason that Patty was on the trade block. I think he's towards the end of his pretty big deal that he signed a couple of years ago and getting up there in age, like yours truly. So I think they might be looking to move on. I know they have a lot of young guards that they want to play minutes, and Patty was out of the rotation in the bubble towards the end when they couldn't make the playoffs. They were blooding their young fellas. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But Patty potentially could be on the move somewhere, possibly to a contender, hopefully. And, you always like to see a guy like Patty remain with where he's had his success. But at the same time, I think the Spurs are middle of the pack. I don't think they're contending for a number of years. It'd be nice to see Patty end up somewhere where he can be that spark off the bench that comes on and lights it up and leads a bench unit to a championship. So who knows? But watch that space. I think he's definitely a guy that has a chance to be put on a different uniform at some point next season. Moving on to the NBL, National Basketball League in Australia. Those not familiar, it's about to start here in mid-January. So we'll do a quick NBL wrap. There's been some rumors about how the format's going to play out. I believe from what I've heard, there's going to be a 5 or 6 round season starting mid-January, home and away season, everything as per normal, travel and all that fun stuff. And then they're actually going to Victoria for a hub, which is interesting. They're going to have a hub mid-season, which from what I've heard, the games will count as per normal towards the regular season. There's going to be, I think, 36, 38 odd games this season instead of 28. The games in the hub count. The games in the hub also count separately to a tournament style where the winner of the hub will get some sort of financial incentive or prize money and a trophy. And so it'll be kind of what the NBA was trying to do with the mid-season tournament, and they've done. I believe they've got some cashola from the Victorian government to seems to be throwing it out like it's gone out of fashion, who will support that, which is great from the Victorian government. Don't get me wrong, just making fun of Andrews whenever I get a chance to. So that's going on, I believe. And then post the hub, the season then continues again as a regular home and away. So I'd be interested to see how that all plays out. I think whoever makes the best out of that hub situation can have a real opportunity to do something special. So I think it hurts the teams with really good home crowds like those Bananas up out in Perth. Great home court out there. I absolutely hate them, but I love them at the same time because they're fantastic. Fantastic arena, beautiful arena to play in, fantastic fans as far as the way they support their team. Best NBL crowd by far. But at the same time, I hate them. As you can understand. So I think they're affected by it a little bit just because they will miss some home games, but I think the NBL will do them some favors. I'm willing to bet that after that hub, they'll have a boatload of home games in Perth. So as usual, their season will be loaded towards having a lot of home games. They'll probably, usually it's because of the tennis and whatnot and the arena availability, but I'm guessing that's what's going to happen. We'll see how that plays out. A few other rumblings out, a few players confidentially get in touch with me. They're a little bit frustrated by the Jock Landale signing. Now, Jock's a great friend of mine, great young fella, country kid, really like him. I think he's not only a great basketball player, but a fantastic person. I enjoyed really being around him and getting on him a little bit as my rookie. He was my coffee bitch on the last national team tour. He had to get, I think it was myself, Joey and Paddy coffees before every game. So used to get on him about that a little bit, but that was all in good fun. But nothing that he did wrong. He just signed a big deal in Melbourne with Melbourne United. The last roster spot for the Melbourne United team signed. I think he was reported that he's the highest paid Australian player in the NBL, and he will be an NBA player one day. I think he has all the tools. He's had a successful stint in Europe so far, and he would have been in Europe if it wasn't for the coronavirus. But I think it's brought an opportunity for the NBL to have some homegrown talent stay in town. The YF players called me. Well, players are taking a 50% pay cut mid this year, leading into this NBL season, not knowing when it was going to start. But basically, we're told by the higher ups at the in the NBL office that a 50% pay cut or it's 0% and there's no season. So players with back and forth with the PA, players had agreed. I had agreed it was the right move because of the shit sandwich we were all in. No one knew if the season was going ahead, and everyone just got to have that sandwich for a season to see how this coronavirus thing's played out. I was in agreement with that. I'll put that on record. And that was at a point where I was still considering playing. So I guess the frustration for players is, how does a club have a roster spot open for such a big amount of money? And it's a valid concern. I'm not saying that United did anything wrong. They did nothing wrong. They put together their best roster and they go over the cap. They pay the luxury tax or whatever. But these were players on other clubs that were like, we've taken a 50% pay cut and now there's these stars coming in and making a lot of money. So, for a guy that's making 120, 130, 140,000, it was weighted, so I don't think they lose exactly 50, but they might lose 30%. So they're close to under 100 there. It hurts them and they've voiced some frustrations. So I just wanted to mention that the league office might need to send out a few Christmas cards to the players this year. But look, if this hub goes well and the season runs well and the NBL makes some profit, which I believe they will, it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe give 10% back to the players and make it 40% pay cut or something along those lines, because they did the right thing by their league, and I think there should be a little bit of a reward for that. So if you're from the NBL or you're someone that knows the higher ups of the NBL there, maybe give them a little nudge that if there's a good year and everything goes well, the players who do a fantastic job competing night in, night out, get a bit of a reward. My favourites for the NBL, look, Perth's always going to be up there. I think they're going to have a lot of home games towards the back end of that season. They play very well in Perth. Their fans are very intimidating. The referees shit their pants when they referee there. Trev's up their ass. Trev's up and down the court. And let me just say, I would be doing exactly the same thing if I was them. Kudos. They've built a fantastic team there. They're basketball proud. They're They're rowdy, they're wild, and they do a lot of good things over there that get them to win basketball games. You just know it's going to be a tough game when you go over there, and you're not going to come out without scratches and bruises and an ear bashing from fans and a lot of whistles against you and get a win. So just one of those things. So I think they'll be up there. Melbourne, arguably the most talented roster on paper. That'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. I think they'll be the ones under pressure to win it. But the one team for me, I think, is Cairns that has a chance to win. I think they do. I think they brought back their 2 gun imports in Scott Machado and Cam Oliver. Fantastic players. I'm so glad they came back. It's so nice for the NBL to be able to get some continuity with imports rather than having new imports every year. The Cairns have somehow managed to bring both those guys back. Fantastic job. They've got a lot of their young Australian talent coming back, so I think they have a genuine opportunity. They've played together for a year now. They pushed Perth to a three-game final series and potentially should have won that series. They were very, very close. Perth, obviously, their veteran leadership won out, and I think Cairns has a chance of winning it. So one thing I will add to the NBL picks, I've seen a fair few people put the Illawarra Hawks. Am I allowed to call them Illawarra? I'm not sure. Is that official yet? Have all the fans there in Illawarra bought all those memberships so you can get your name back? If you haven't, get out there and buy a membership. But I'm going to go on record and say Brian Goorjian coach team is not going to finish last. A lot of people have picked them to finish dead last. I don't think their rosters are half as bad as people think, and they're going to battle. They might not make the playoffs. I don't think they will, but they're not finishing last. The Goorjian team, you might come back at the end of the season, they finish last, and give me a bit of a clip behind the ears on social media or whatever, but I just don't see a Brian Goorjian team finishing last, and I think their roster has some guys that can go, and they will recruit well. Their imports will be good, and Gorge will find a way to have that team be competitive, and it's not going to be a walkover Illawarra Hawks team that's, up and down like a yo-yo. They're gonna be strong and play to their strengths. They're not going to beat themselves. So just one tidbit, and that's about it for the NBL. We're going to get to the Q&A next. Quick reminder: if you want to get involved in the Q&A, Rogue Bogues, one word, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube has the email details of where to send your questions. But if you've got a pen right now, it's roguebogues@gmail.com. Send through your questions. We'll get through them as we can. I'm going to be answering generally 6 questions. My playing number for most of my career was number 6. So I'll do my best to answer what we get. We had a huge number of questions come through, almost 100 questions to siphon through. So appreciate everyone sending them through. If your question didn't get asked, it's not because it was bad. It's just the 6 that we chose were probably the best for this week. And if you want to keep a lookout for when the next Ask Me Anything segment is, we'll announce them on socials for the basketball podcast specifically, or any of the other ones. So just stay tuned on there. But let's get rolling with this. Ask Me Anything. The first one comes from Daniel Boyle. Says he's from the northern suburbs of Melbourne. As a father of a young bloke, 8 years old, loves basketball, especially kicking my ass on 2K20 on my Xbox. My question is, what are 3 of the most important skills or values you think junior sports boys and girls should be taught, and how parents and or coaches help get them into kids in relevance to basketball? It's a good question. It's pretty easy for me. The first thing is having fun and enjoying the sport. Let's say it is basketball that you're doing. If you're not going to enjoy what you're doing, don't do it. Like the parents that force their kids to do a sport because they're living their childhood dreams with their kids, I cringe when I see that, because you can see the kid has no enjoyment. He knows he's doing it because you want him to do it because you're getting enjoyment out of it. Wrong. Don't do it, because you're just going to have so many issues with your child father or child mother relationship beyond that sport that it will be hard to repair. So the first thing for me, fun, enjoyment. Second thing for me is winning and losing. That is deemed as controversial today, which is an absolute joke in itself. When you're 3, 4, 5, I agree, participate, have fun. Kids don't really know too much about scoring. They know winning or losing, though, because my son's 4 and he knows when he wins or loses a race. I can tell you that, because he's pissed if he loses. But as soon as they become involved in organised sport, winning and losing is going to be an integral part of that. Now, there's these idiotic associations with all walks of sports, basketball, football, soccer, whatever, that don't keep score. Let me give you a tip. The kids know the score. They keep score in their head. They know who won or lost at the end of the game. You're not fooling them. So just keep score and actually instill some values in your children with winning and losing. That is the key. So when you win, there are valuable lessons. Those lessons are, do you gloat and go and rub it in the loser's face? No, you don't. You be respectful, shake hands and you be respectful. And then if you want to celebrate and gloat, you do that away from the losing team, obviously. And you enjoy a moment with your team. The beauty of winning, especially for kids at a young age, is most kids will become complacent, especially in individual sports, somewhat in team. But let's say you play an individual sport, you play tennis and you win your first local match and you play really well. That kid generally won't practice or train as hard that following week. It's human nature. They think they're on top of the world. And generally, a week later, a month later, the next meet, they're going to get a wake-up call. That's a huge learning experience for that child. And that's brought from winning. But he's actually gone back down the hill and he's starting back from the bottom again because he got a wake-up call. The flip side of that is losing. There's losing respectfully, which at times I had trouble with. I'm not going to lie. I take losing very hard and at times could have handled things better. And I've definitely been a bad loser at times. I'll easily admit that. From a child's point of view, learning how to lose is important. Good sportsmanship, shaking hands with the winner and moving on. The biggest thing about losing is then addressing why you lost. So you lost a game. In a team sport, it's a little bit different because there's a lot more other factors. But if you played bad and you lost, it's pretty easy to address, right? Individual sport's much easier. Okay. So now that kid that lost is generally going to put more time in that following week and get better the next week. They might not win yet, but the more time they put in, they have a better chance of winning or playing better themselves. That's where we've lost it as a society. We've tried to bubble wrap our kids and not have them face adversity and not then have them feel like a loser, quote unquote. No, losing is good. It's very, very good. Winning is good. Losing is good. But I think we've just lost our ways a little bit. So that'd be the second thing. The third most important thing for me is just putting in the time and effort. And that generally will outweigh talent eventually. There'll be a cross-axis. There'll be a meeting point where you're at the same level as talent and you'll keep going up because you're working more. And working doesn't always necessarily mean running up and down a court. If it's basketball, it means watching highlights, watching tapes, watching games, studying. There were times I would be at home lying on my bed, just have a ball in my hands, throwing it around, pretending to shoot it, just feeling the ball and, even using your imagination as a young fella, as stupid as it sounds. Those things are all part of putting time into your craft. And if you do those three things, you have a very good opportunity to be a professional or be a very good junior player. So that answers that. Thanks for your question. Question number 2 comes from Jackson, who is located in Brisbane. Jackson with an X, Jackson Waldy. Question is, as an Aussie growing up, who made you want to play basketball, especially in a country where basketball wasn't really popular at the time? Nobody is the short answer. I didn't have anyone pushing me towards basketball. My parents, my dad didn't know anything about basketball. They didn't push me towards it, much to the contrary of all the bananas that rail me for being rich because I'm 7 foot. I didn't know I was going to be 7 foot at 8 or 9 years old when I fell in love with the game. My parents were 6'4" and 5'11", 5'10". There's no chance I would have thought I was going to be 7 foot. So I just played because I love the game and it all ended up working out and the rest is history. But it wasn't anyone specifically. My dad was a soccer player as a young fella, so he liked soccer. Mum wasn't very sporty. I just genuinely accidentally fell in love with the game. And it started with throwing a tennis ball and then a soccer ball through a rusty old hoop that was at outside my dad's mechanical workshop. That in-depth story is on the Rogue Bogues My Journey series. So I urge you to listen to that whole childhood story, and episode 2 will drop soon as well. Yeah, I mean, that's where all that lies. It just wasn't a person. If anything, TV probably played a huge part. I still remember the peak of NBL basketball. It was Friday night games, sold out, entertainment center, that was live on TV. Then they'd show a game, I think Saturday, Arvo, and potentially even Sunday for the NBL. It'd be 2 or 3 games a weekend. And then on top of that, you get, I think it was Saturday morning was the game of the week. So they condense a full NBA game to an hour. So it'd just be a quick game. And then I think Sunday morning they had NBA Action, which was a 30-minute highlight tape. And I would record all of those and then watch them that whole week until I had new recordings the next week, and never delete anything, because then for the off season, it would all be tapes I'd watch every day, and then I'd go outside and shoot or play afterwards. So that's where you can really put time and energy into the game when you're not playing. And it goes back to the question that it wasn't really a person for me. It wasn't a father figure, a parent, a cousin, auntie, uncle. It was sheer luck that I fell into a sport that I ended up being the perfect height for, and playing in the NBA. So thanks for your question, Jackson. We'll get to the next one, which is from Troy Asquith. I hope I pronounced that right. Pretty sure it'd be pretty close though. He's from Ipswich in Queensland. Been there a few times actually, funnily enough, along my journeys for numerous reasons. And the question is, when you went down with your elbow injury, your career was on a steady incline to one of the best centers in the league. How much pressure was there from the Bucks front office and coaches to get you back to that player that quickly was becoming one of the better centers in the league, or were they mostly supportive? It's a tough one because it was a real point in my career where things changed rapidly. I was my most successful year as an individual in the NBA, 16 and 10 a night, made the All-NBA third team. And that second half of the season, I really started ascending. I really started playing well, confident, started to figure out the landscape of how the league works and all that kind of stuff, and was really, really feeling good, expanding my game, being able to go left and right, started to shoot the face-up jumper, and it was all coming together beautifully. And then one elbow injury, I ended up breaking my elbow, fully dislocating it, breaking my wrists, and then breaking my index finger all on the right side, breaking my wrist on both sides as well. I have a cast from the top of my shoulder down to my index finger, so did that in March or April, and it was a 6 to 9 month injury, depending on how much range of motion I could get back in my elbow, which takes time. And I rushed back. I came back in September stupidly, and probably should have taken a bit more time off to get the rehab. To get closer to 100%, I probably came back at 60, 65, 70% as far as how my arm was, and sucked it up, played through it. And I had an issue with my elbow for the whole season. I kept complaining about getting every fourth, fifth shot that I'd shoot, jumper or hook shot, I'd feel like someone put a knife in my elbow right in the joint. So I'd go to the trainer and be like, mate, something's not right. I'm losing feeling. It's the sharp stabbing pain. No, you'll be right, mate. You'll be right. And I went and got nerve tests. I got all kinds of tests because I was worried about it. I knew something wasn't right. And the more I went to the trainer, the more he made me feel like a dickhead. I just felt like I was soft and what am I complaining about? So I just stopped complaining about it. To him as the season went on. I was taping it up and whatever, and at the end of the season I ended up going and getting a surgery done, or a scope, arthroscopic surgery, and they take out a huge chunk of floating bone that was just loose in my elbow joint. So the elbow joint's not a massive joint as it is, and yeah, it's got a big chunk of bone. Asked the surgeon to box that up for me for takeout, and he put it in a jar for me, and I took it back and threw it in the trainer's face and said, mate, like I'm not. This is just to prove I'm not crazy, like, and I'm not being soft. Like, this was in my elbow, and the rest is history with that. My career really changed because I had Scott Skiles as a coach, and thankfully he was on me about being a better defender. And I came out of college labeled as a defensive bust, and I'm really proud of the fact that I made an all defensive second team and was one of the best defenders on the low block or in the low post in the league at one point. And that was a big thank you to Scott Skiles for teaching me that, teaching me how to really control a game from the defensive end. And thankfully he got on me regarding that, because my offensive game declined and my defensive game got better. So I still was able to be a 30-plus minute player and contribute out there. And I still had a solid year with that elbow injury. I averaged a double-double. I think I led the league in blocks that year. I was still playing pretty well. For the most part, a double-double with leading the league in blocks isn't too shabby with basically one arm. Couldn't go right at all that year. Couldn't shoot right. And then it affected kind of confidence from the free throw line. And that was a mental battle throughout my career after that. Still grinded a pretty good career out of it. But yeah, there was a definite change in my game. And look, at the end of the day, it all worked out. When you look back, I ended up getting moved to Milwaukee and to Golden State from Milwaukee and winning the championship. So can't cry over spilt milk too much. Just have a few little ouchies to show the kids along the way. Question 4 comes from Christian Bleisner. Something along those lines. I hope I said it right. Bleisner. And Christian is from the Frankston area, right near home. Occasionally visits Dandenong in Endeavour Hills. Cool to hear about the story on the Rogue Bogues My Journey, episode 1. Thank you for that. Very interesting question coming up. What was the game that you were involved in that was the worst officiated? And do you think Tim Donaghy was the only ref on the $, on the money, on the take? So I don't specifically remember any games where we absolutely got screwed. I mean, looking back, when you're in the moment, I'm sure there was plenty. One thing you learn is referees are human. They make mistakes like anybody. They do get caught up in the moment sometimes. There were some referees that were as emotional as players, and you had to figure that out along the way. It's just like anything else. the crazy thing, the hardest thing I found was the referees that knew they made a bad call and then still were so kind of prideful about it. They tee you up after you complained or whatever. And the good referees would diffuse a situation instantly by, if they made a bad call, they'd say, "Oh, mate, yeah, I screwed that one up. I missed that one." Or, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I blew my whistle a bit early." And then no matter how pissed you were, you just couldn't keep going with it because you're like, he just admitted he messed up. So you'd always say, "All right, mate, you owe me one," and they'd nod their head, whatever. They hear that 100 times a game. But those are the refs I respected. There were a lot that were emotional and would just, want to be part of the game instead of being what they should be. Referees, in my opinion, shouldn't be seen. They should be, a good referee. A good referee is not seen or heard or talked about, and the game flows beautifully. That's a good referee. A referee that makes it about himself generally is not a good referee, in my opinion. As far as the Tim Donaghy stuff, very interesting times. It really put a dark cloud over the NBA. Tim, I've listened to a few of his podcasts that he's done, claims that he never bet on any games that he refereed specifically, that all he would do was give his bookie friend or friends information regarding relationships he knew were strained between referees and players, which I'm sure he did, but I think he did a bit more than that and possibly betted on his own games as well, but that's all alleged. What Tim was saying was that if he knew a referee hated a certain player and vice versa, he knew that player would get a bunch of fouls early, they'd foul him out, he wouldn't get to the free throw line as much, he wouldn't get those superstar calls if he was a superstar, and that would greatly affect the spread or the game. And he'd tell the bookies, like, the away team's got a better chance because that ref's not going to give the superstar home call. So that happens a lot in our league as far as strained relationships between players and some referees. And we had a certain guy on our team in Golden State that one referee absolutely hated him every time we played him, and every time he refereed us, there was something shady that would kind of half happen, and I'm not saying he was on the take, I'm just saying the relationship between that player and the referee was just not good, and we knew we were in for it. So as far as, do I think Tim Donaghy was the only ref, this might be controversial to say, but no. I think he has stated that he wasn't. People will then say, well, can you trust what he says considering what he's done? But I think in the course of NBA history, to think there's only ever been one referee that's given bookies information that's, been involved in something a bit shady, or whether it was, massive or small. Human nature and money don't go well together, and I'd be willing to bet the house there's at least been one referee over the course of NBA history that's had some sort of involvement with betting and bookies. That's just my opinion. I can't give you a name because I don't know who it would be, but there's obviously, in my opinion, more than just one. You'd be silly to think it's just one referee over the course of NBA history, especially when, back 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, the referees weren't getting paid a lot of money. You know what I mean? They're getting a bit better now, where they can treat it as a full-time job. A lot of them still have side jobs. I know that for a fact, but human nature, money talks, bullshit walks. So in my opinion, the answer would be yes. I think other referees have, at some point in NBA history, there's someone out there that has done something dodgy as far as refereeing an NBA basketball game, and you'd be silly to think otherwise because it's happened in almost every sport in the world at some point. Fifth question comes from Thomas Smith, and his question is pretty simple. Australia has shot up the FIBA World Rankings over the past 10 years or so. What do you think has contributed most to the improvement, and what further things need to be done to ensure we continue this trend? It's a great question. In Australia, have always had a great junior program. So our junior basketball program here is, in my opinion, top 5 in the world, and always has been. What we're seeing now is that transitioning and translating into senior basketball, where it didn't do that in the 80s, 90s, and even 2000s. It went, our junior teams would be heavy hitters in world tournaments and be top 3, top 4. Under 21s in 98 or 97 won the world championships. We won one in 03. Under 19s world championships, gold medalists. But those players then wouldn't really transition to the NBA or Europe. They'd end up just floating back to the NBL and maybe going to college and then coming back to the NBL. Whereas now we're starting to see that massive transition from juniors to pros, and I think I'd like to think I'm a part of it without tooting my own horn. I think Luke Longley is the original gangster when it comes to that. He was the trendsetter, and he led a lonely life as far as an Australian in the NBA. And I think a few Aussies also, Shane Heal, Andrew Gaze, Chris Anstey went over there and had really, really small stints. Anstey was probably the longest tenured out of those guys, and I think he got to 3 or 4 years, and no one really stuck. and I got drafted in 2005. And yeah, I mean, it was big news in Australia, but unknown news. No one really knew about NBA basketball too much here to an extent outside of cult followers. And for an Australian to go number one, you know, it was massive. And I think that set a trend for kids here saying, you know what, I can get to the NBA. Maybe not number one, maybe not top 10, but I can get to the NBA if this kid can. His journey of growing up in the suburbs of Melbourne to becoming a top 5 number 1 draft pick, it's achievable. And then now I've seen a snowball effect of it. And I couldn't be more proud of seeing more and more Aussies in the NBA. And the number now that we're at is, I don't even know, I didn't research it, but we're in double digits. And not only are guys in the NBA, but they're playing vital roles for their team. Ben Simmons, Joe Ingles, Aaron Baines, Patty Mills, you know, the list goes on. Even Delhi has a huge role for his team, mainly culturally and in the locker room when he's not playing minutes. So everyone's has a big effect on their teams and franchises, and I couldn't be prouder of it. I think it's absolutely sensational. I love the fact that I was a part of the start of that journey to show that, hey, this is achievable. Like it's something that was more of a fairy tale for the most part, but is now something that everyone can feel and touch through myself and Joey and Ben Simmons and Patty and Bainesy, and we come back and play for the Boomers, and I think people now know it's achievable. So couldn't be more proud, and hopefully we continue that pipeline in the future. The one tidbit I'd say is the end of your question was, can we continue that? That's my one concern. This has been the most successful year of churning out NBA players this last decade in Australian basketball history. It's hard to sustain. I just hope we continue to develop at the level we are, and I hope there's not a drop off, because after this Boomers group, I think this core group has another 3 or 4 years, bar Ben Simmons and Dante and a few other guys, Josh Green. But let's hope we can get 1 or 2 Aussies every other draft, and we'll continue that trajectory. But that's the one concern I have is, let's make sure we keep this rolling and it just doesn't get down to 1 or 2 guys again. Last question number 6. This one came in right on the buzzer. Right before I was about to do the pod, it came in, and it was an interesting one, which I'm sure will be a bit controversial, but it's what I'm here for, right? It comes from Daniel Drum. These are his words, not mine, so don't get mad at me. It's from a farm in the Wimmera, Victoria region, in brackets, aka bumfuck nowhere. Don't get mad at me. His words, not mine. And his question is a long-winded one, so I'll get reading. During the NBA China controversy, where LeBron James eloquently told the media that his colleague is uneducated and selfish for promoting human rights in Hong Kong and shouldn't speak up on social issues, there was next to no criticism from fellow NBA players on his blatant hypocrisy. From what I saw, there was only your fine self and the defensive monster from Turkey, Enes Kanter, not a defensive monster, more an offensive monster, but that's okay, I'll give you a pass, had the balls to publicly react to comments on social media. The rest of the NBA world, at least in terms of NBA players, was silent. What do you think was the main reason for nearly no other NBA players reacting to LeBron's comments? Do you think it's because they're worried about hurting their relationship with LeBron, their deal with Nike, a lack of interest in or knowledge of what's going on between China and Hong Kong, or a combination of all, or something else? Well, the short answer is money talks, bullshit walks. That's the short answer. I think there's a bunch of different factors. I think you hit one of them. I think there is a smaller number these days of players who have no idea what's going on outside the US. It used to be much bigger. I think you can't really have that excuse as much, considering social media and how close we are to the rest of the world now. But there would be a small number of guys, much like Americans, I love you, but not the best at knowing what's going on in the rest of the world at times outside of the US. You factor in, usually know what's going on in your suburb, in your city, in your state, and in your country. But beyond that, we're pushing it a little bit. It's just it is fact. So I hope that doesn't offend people, but it is fact. So that there probably were some players that couldn't even point to Hong Kong on a map, which is fair enough. But a large number fall in the hypocrisy basket. I think there's a fair few players in our league that do a lot of PSAs and activists for numerous causes, especially in the last 12 months, which is I have no issue with whatsoever. I think LeBron does a great job of promoting whatever he needs to promote and what he likes to promote and his passions and all that kind of stuff. No issue with that. But I think when it comes to NBA China, there's muddied waters because they're writing big checks. And I know for a fact there's a lot of guys that go over to China in the off season and run, for 7 days. They run a few camps, kiss a few babies, shake hands, do a few meet and greets at a mall for a corporation or whatever, and they get a $500,000, $600,000, $1 million deposited in their account, they're not going to say anything. At the same time, their shoe companies, all of them, the biggest spenders and people that buy the most apparel, whether it be whatever brand you want to name, whether it's a Chinese brand, American brand, it's the purchasing powers from China. So they can single-handedly bomb a company's earnings, and players are paid by those shoe companies. So the moment these comments came out by Daryl Morey, which was a ballsy move by him, and I respect it, I think he did apologize, which I wish he didn't, because he didn't say anything wrong. If you're going to be an activist about human rights in one country, you more than likely should be a human's right activist throughout the world, right? I don't buy the whole, I don't know enough about the situation or blah, blah, blah. And then there was these people saying that, it doesn't fix the issues that are happening on our ground and what's happening here. Well, you have to agree, there is a level of hypocrisy, because it would hurt the bottom line for some people. So I think Morey's comments were interesting, but I think, comes down to money, man. It just comes down to money at the end of the day. NBA China spend a lot of money in the NBA, as we know. I've been there numerous times, and they love NBA basketball, and they're super fans. They treat the NBA players like rock stars over there, and they're a big reason why the NBA players and us as NBA athletes have made so much money over the last decade plus, and why it's surged is because of NBA China. It's no coincidence, since Yao Ming, having him involved in the league, that the league has just, it's gone 100x since then. So you can't fault that, but at the same time, you can't deny that China has its own issues with human rights violations, and most of the apparel that we see superstars wear is made by slave labor. So, it is a bit hypocritical, especially considering what's going on in Hong Kong and the rest of the world. And for even athletes out there to say, shut up and dribble, when it comes to that question, I don't know enough about the situation, when you know everything about every other situation that involves activism, was hypocritical in my book. But like I said, at the end of the day, every one of those players would have got a call from their agent the day that Morey comment dropped. The clubs would have had them in meetings. The PR people at all the NBA clubs would have had them in and said, shut your mouths. Do not comment on China. The league would have called clubs individually, and their agents would have called players individually. Do not comment, no comment. Say you don't know. I don't care what you say. Plead the fifth. Act like you don't know anything outside of the city you're in. Act like you're the biggest idiot in the world. You don't know enough about the situation. And what do we see? Don't know enough about the situation to comment, which was a load of shit for the most part. So hypocrisy rules, money talks, bullshit walks. Moving on from the Q&A, I'm going to finish Rogue Bogues, the basketball podcast. I'll try to finish it with Storytime with Bogues. It's going to be a segment we finish, and it's generally going to be a funny story along the way. And I think this one's pretty funny. I hope it is. Kind of mature, but at the same time was hilarious to me at the time, and it still is today. We're going back to 2007, my second year in the NBA, 06-07 year. Head coach Terry Stotts, it was his second year with us. He was a rookie head coach, came in with me as a rookie player. He was rookie head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks, sorry. It was his first, I think he coached Atlanta before that. Had a lot of success as a head coach, and he, my rookie year, we make the playoffs. I think I was one of 3 number 1 picks ever in the NBA to make the playoffs their rookie year. I think myself, Tim Duncan, and I think it was Joe Smith. I could be wrong. But anyway, Terry he's coaching for Portland now, obviously. Very, very good X's and O's. Really, I think was ahead of the game at that point in his career as far as his spacing and the way he taught the game offensively. Defensively was okay. Wasn't the number 1 priority for him, but was okay. But he was a coach that's way better suited to now. When I first came in the league, I came from 2 hard-headed coaches, disciplinarians, guys that would yell and scream, and that wasn't Terry. He wasn't a guy that would get after plays, and that's perfectly fine. That's his style. This isn't a criticism by any means. And Terry, if someone we're doing things this way, and then someone did it a different way, he wouldn't really arc up. He'd be like, come on, mate, there'd never really be he'd never raise his voice. He just wasn't that coach, right? Which is fine. It's not a criticism, like I said. So you fast forward on to 2006-07 season. We have a kid who ends up being a pretty good friend of mine. I've known for a little while since the junior tournaments, Damir Markota. And Croatian kid, he gets drafted by us, comes over. And okay player. I mean, he was floating between us and the G League, and didn't stick in the NBA, but could shoot the 3 ball, a bit undersized for the 4 spot. Wild kid, man. Like a really, what would I say? Like he's the life of a party when he goes out. Really nice guy. But wow, like to party, like to get out and have a good time. He'd be the guy that's in the nightclub or the bar that everyone would kind of surround around as the night got longer because he just had a presence about him being out and just was a good dude, right? So he's in Milwaukee. Milwaukee, last call generally at bars and clubs is 1:30 a.m. Clubs close their door at 2. This dude would find stuff. He'd find, I don't know where the hell he would go. He'd be out till 6, 7 in the morning. I found this house party from the club owner, and then they did this, and he's just one of those guys that would just end up having a good time no matter what, right? So everyone kind of knew he was a little wild and liked to get after it, which wasn't really an issue. Like, it's not like he was showing up late or anything, but just keep that in mind that he was kind of wild and reckless at times. So I had to look the date up. January 31st, 2007. We're playing at Orlando, and they're still at the old arena, obviously, because it hadn't been built yet. And 10 years later, it got built. But so we're playing, and we're down 56-29 at halftime. Just absolute shitter of a half of basketball. We pretty much lost the game. We're down, 27 points in the first half. And I mean, basically, they need a 6-minute period in the third quarter, and they can get their starters out, and the game's over. So they pretty much wrap the game up. We're playing terrible, and coaches generally at halftime will go to a coach's locker room. We walk to our locker room, players' locker room. They go to the coaches. They talk about the game, maybe a few adjustments. Hey, they keep killing us on this play, or Dwight Howard's killing Bogut down there. We need to send a double team from the weak side, whatever, right? They'll make some adjustments. The coach comes in, talks to us. 3 or 4 minutes, guys go to the bathroom, rehydrate, go back out on the court, right? Whenever a coach comes straight in and doesn't go to that assistant coaches meeting, you know something's going to happen. Like, he's going to blow up, abuse everyone, go crazy, right? So this is one of those nights. Terry comes barging in straight away. And I'm like, okay, like, we're going to ask us kicked. We kind of really don't need to hear it, but at the same time, like, I want to see Terry fire up. Like, I think it's a good thing. I think he needs to do that every now and then, just put one up us and tell us, call us every name under the sun and threaten playing time and all that. Great, right? So this locker room, think of a square room. Around that square room is the lockers are built into the wall, basically in a U shape, and then the front is the whiteboard and the coach. So standard room, locker room. It's an old school arena. All the benches are hardwood benches, right? Like parquetry type benches, but elevated onto seats. So Terry comes in, he's losing his shit. He's like, what are you guys doing? This is bullshit. Like, we're not doing anything we talked about. You guys aren't here. Did you go out last night? What the hell's going on there? And he's losing it, right? And so I'm like, oh, he's actually losing it. Like, great. Like, it's actually not a bad thing. And right halfway through that speech, you just hear, and so everyone stops. Terry stops, looks straight ahead where the sound came from. You had 3 guys. I think you had Demir, a guy named Lingria, who was an American fellow who played all over Europe and then came back to the NBA. And then I don't know who was next to Demir, Michael Red or someone was next to him. But basically, out of those 3 guys, you're like, you know who did it, right? So Terry looks straight at Demir, goes straight for him and says, Demir, did you just fart? And Demir, goes, Coach, yes, I could not hold in. Sorry, my stomach. I'm sorry. And Terry loses his shit. Then it ends up losing it at Demir. We make no adjustments. Obviously, we don't know what the hell is going on. We've basically penciled in a loss anyway. But this dude's the reason why it was so bad is because the hardwood benches, man. The thing echoed. I reckon you would be able to hear that out on the court, man. It was so loud. And I don't know what Demir was doing because he liked to mess around a lot and be jovial, and he would often try to fart when people were talking or coaches were talking, and he tried to do it. He tried to do it loud enough so that people next to him would hear and start laughing, and then coach would ask, what are you guys laughing at? He tried to do those stupid stuff that you do in a locker room, high school type shit. And I just think it just was too loud because of the wooden benches. But anyway, he got himself in some shit. So the next, we get blown out. We lose by, I don't know what we lose by, probably the same score. We lose by 20, 30 points. Next morning, we are flying back to, I don't even know where we're flying back to. And Demir's not on the plane. He's like, where's Demir at? Where's Demir at? And he's not here. And they're like, oh, no, we've sent him off to the G League. They've assigned him straight to the G League. They would have assigned him at halftime, man, if they could have. They sent this kid to the G League the very next day, which was Tulsa, was our affiliate, and he would have to take in 3 flights from Orlando to get there. And we didn't see him again until the end of the season. So just an interesting story along the way. Poor old Demir Marketer got sent down to the G League. We didn't see him until the end of the season, all because couldn't hold it in, coach. Just a funny story for you to end the first ever Rogue Bogues basketball podcast. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to get those Q&As in, follow all our socials, because from time to time we'll put posts out welcoming those Q&As. But have a good day or good night wherever you're listening, and we'll see you next time.